Amazing. Sue, thank you so much. This is our 100th podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I had a good old think about who I'd love to chat to for the 100th podcast. And given the list of people that we've had, from high performers, high achievers, people who've strived and perhaps not quite made it, but have got lessons to share, some researchers, some coaches, I just thought, actually, it probably needs somebody who's got perspective, and has got a dose of inspiration. Every time I speak to you, that's what you provide. So it was an obvious choice for me. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Very flattered. Thank you.
Can I start with a big question, which sort of speaks today, really? The recent events of the last couple of years, all the challenges that we've had in our lives, the pandemic, political division, global challenges, and how are you viewing sport through that lens? I think it's really made me question, but also really reminded me of the importance of sport.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. On the one hand, you could see it as something trivial in against some of the major challenges we've got, and in the other, you could see it as something that helps shape lives and change attitudes, whether that's inspiring people, whether it's just getting people physically active again. We know that physically active people tend to often be emotionally better. So sometimes, getting people to take exercise when they're emotionally traumatized or down or depressed is a great antidote to those things. But sport itself, I think, through the pandemic, I think people clung on to whatever sport was available, so that the whole fact that we kept men's football going. Unfortunately, we couldn't keep the women's game going, but the men's kept going. People found that something to hang on to. It gave people a sense of normality, and something was actually happening. So sort of as at the elite end, I think it can give a sense of inspiration and normality. Things are continuing despite all the trauma. And at the grassroots end, I think sport is just an enormously important outlet. And, I think for young people in our schools, not only do we need to catch up in terms of their academic work, we need to catch up in terms of their exercise and their physical activity, because I think it's such an important part of education.
Yeah, and personally, did you feel that dichotomy? There's the exercise and the rationale from, one of the interesting things with when people are saying you can only have 1 hour of exercise a day, everyone was like, right, I'm having that. People got active, didn't they? It was actually inspired people to take the exercise. But that sense of we're still in...
full.
Yeah.
Sort
of threaten to take something away or constrain it, and everyone fills up the void. But that sense of we're investing and prioritizing activities that don't have a very specific outcome to the challenges that we have, but it offers us a feeling, it offers us a sense of escapism, that hope. Did you feel that contradiction yourself at all?
I think part of what I was doing was sort of battling with trying to get us through the women's game, through what was a terribly difficult challenge, and making the right decisions for, number one, the player welfare, making sure our players were at the centre of our decisions. And then secondly, having to deal with, COVID testing, finding money for tests, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a part of me that was just getting on with daily business, if you know what I mean. But I think when we did get the chance to reflect, so for example, the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics, I think people saw that as a really inspiring, almost new beginning. And although for the athletes, it was very COVID restricted, and it certainly wasn't like a normal Olympic or Paralympic experience, for those of us watching it, for those of us spectating it, I think it was a real joyful, uplifting feeling that, things will get back to normal and this is all happening. And the joy of watching some of those people win and their excitement and the thrill of it, it just lifts you out of your day-to-day existence, which I think everybody needed. I've worked at home now for 1.5 years and 2 years now nearly, and it feels you can feel very closed in, you can feel very alone, and you can feel very down. And just being able to watch that and experience that was kind of, for me, a real opportunity to feel uplifted, energized, and ready to go again. That's how it affected me personally.
Was that tremendous sense of release, wasn't it? People really celebrating what they do best.
Yeah.
You said there about going again, and I was really inspired to see when you took up the role of head of women's football at the FA in 2016. Having led UK Sport, NCF, Youth Sport Trust, what motivated you to go again?
You mean when I should have gone to the golf course?
Well, I'm not saying that, but it was just fun, seeing the announcement and thinking, fantastic, Sue's in there, but also just a hat tip to, Sue's in there again. As in you're plying your trade, you're attempting to develop a system again. What motivated you?
I've spent so much of my professional life, which passionate about sport changing lives, men and women's lives. But in particular, as we've seen less participation for girls, many of the challenges that women face in society. When Martin Glenn asked me if I would go in and do this, my initial reaction was no. I don't need another challenge like this. I don't need another Everest, so to speak. I've done it, having been at UK Sport. But the more I reflected on it, and the more I thought, the Football Association, the FA, football as a whole, is a very powerful brand. Is this a chance to, really take the power of that brand and affect massive change in girls and women, not just as players, not just for health and emotional well-being, but as leaders, people who can coach, people who can referee, people in the boardroom. Why does that matter? Because it's a sport that's spoken about in so many homes that probably don't ever read public legislation or think about equality. And this is just about equalising. It's about giving girls the opportunity to play, as boys have, giving girls an opportunity to coach, referee, and administer sport. And the more I thought about it, the more I got excited by the potential. So I said to Martin that I would do 3 days a week for a couple of years, pull a strategy together, and then I'd be gone. That was 5.5 years ago, and here I am now doing 6 days a week. And but I've enjoyed it. It's been massively challenging. It hasn't always been enjoyable. It's been tough. But it's incredibly rewarding. Like any great challenge, the rewards that come with it are enormous, and you have to push through on those days when you're thinking, what on earth am I doing this for? Because we all get them. It's been an incredible experience, and I wouldn't have missed it. So it's been like another Everest, really. We're not at the top yet. We're only at sort of camp 3 probably. We've still got a way to go to get to the top of the mountain in terms of the women's game, but we're certainly on the journey, and we've now the confidence. Well, first of all, we can see the top of the mountain, which when I first came, it was shrouded in mist. We now know where we're going, and the challenge is now to get there, which is a very different kind of challenge.
And so, what is that? What is the vision of the summit there? But also, I'm keen to get your perspective as to what are the major base camps that you've achieved along the way that you've been? So the last 5 years or so, what are the accomplishments that you can look back and think the game has progressed in that time, and we can see that objectively?
Yeah, I think when I came to the FA, the game had been driven forward by what I'd call pioneers, individuals who'd done some great things, whether that was in coaching or development or all various aspects. But it wasn't something that sat at the heart of the Football Association's strategy or vision for the future. So my first job was to create momentum. So rather than come up with a a fully embracing strategy for the women's game. In 2017, we produced Game Plan for Growth, and we only targeted 3 things: doubling participation, doubling the fan base, and growing the professional game. And that's what we've done. You know, between 20 and 24, we doubled participation. We massively increased the fan base. Still a job to do getting that fan base to come through the gates, but in terms of people watching, eyes on the game, it's massive. And you know, we did turn the league professional, full first ever country in Europe to have a full-time professional women's league, and the professional game is growing from strength to strength. So that was the momentum. How could we get people's eyes on the game? How could we get focus on what we were doing? How could we drive, you know, an ambition within the FA as well as out with the FA that we could do something special? So having gained momentum in that first plan, which was 2017 to 2020, we've pulled together a full strategy now, which it covers every aspect of the game. And I guess the big pieces for that, or the vision, if you like, of the summit, is trying to give equal opportunity to girls to play football in schools. So thanks to Barclays, we're in something like 12,500 schools, but our intention is to be in 95% of schools by 2024. That means providing girls an opportunity to play in curriculum, lunchtime, after school. We've developing a community offer, which is football for fun, as opposed to football for competition. So it sits alongside, so whether you're motivated to just play with your friends or you actually want to compete, both pathways are available to you. And then the other big piece is a newly designed, thought through talent pathway, which will help those girls who have the ambition to play professionally to really see a very clearly signposted route way. We've got one at the minute, but it's just not clear, and it's not at the quality and clarity we need. And then at the top end of the game, it's really to make sure that the Super League and Championship are, well, the statement we've made is the best professional league for women in the world. So we've had a good look at what is the best, you know, what are the best professional leagues so we can benchmark. So really we've got real clarity in every part of the game. And alongside that, of course, what we're trying to do in coaching, what we're trying to do in refereeing, and what we're trying to do in governance to run the game. So the strategy now is real clarity, that, you know, you can really see the snow on the mountaintop now. You can see what we're trying to get to. The momentum was sort of getting us to camp 3 and then stopping a minute and having a look, okay, what have we learned and what do we need to do now? So I think you'd now say we have a strategy, 10-year plan. It'll evolve and change, obviously, throughout the time, but that's where we are.
I'm almost drawing parallels to our shared experiences in the UK sport, Olympic and Paralympic system, whereby in those early days, the system was forming in the late 90s and early 2000s, that drive and that infrastructure coming through. We had comparison points with particularly Australia, who the institute system was going well. It was world leading in terms of its outlook and its performance. And so we were looking at that thinking maybe we should copy that. that sense of, oh, there's a system over there that's just sitting alongside. We should copy some of that. But actually in the reality of those, particularly in the early 2000s, we sort of borrowed principles and we borrowed ideas as much as, or we used it as a competitor to vie against. Have you got a similar approach where you're looking at the men's game saying, we'll take that from the men's game, but we'll set our own new course and identity in the women's game?
Yeah, I think the difference with the UK sport one is, and I learned this early on at the National Coaching Foundation when, you know, there was just me and one other person working at the foundation, and the idea was we were going to produce the best coach development strategy, you know, education system in the world. And I had a blank sheet of paper, and I remember going to see Jeff Gowan in Canada. He'd put the Canadian system together, and then an amazing guy called Rainer Martins in the USA. And what I learned really quickly from those was people design systems that fit their culture, and the Australian system fitted its culture. Institutes in each of the states, and then this mega institute in the middle. There was so much to gain from the Australian Institute. You know, world-class sports science, world-class sports medicine, great coaches, super environment, great analysis. But we weren't built to have an institute in the middle of the M6 or something. So it was taking those principles and bringing them back. The difference here in men's football is it has been built in our culture. So there are lots of things about the men's game that are worthy of copying. However, as it's evolved to be at the top end, more about entertainment than what I might call pure sport, and some will argue with that, but you know, it is now entertainment. The volume of people going to watch games, the broadcast deals, the commercial deals, they're phenomenal. So that changes the nature of what you're watching to some extent. The women's game is nowhere near that yet. In my mind, and again, people might argue with me, it's pure sport. It hasn't arrived in that world of entertainment. So it's easier to retain some of the basic values of respecting referees, or you know, not feigning injury, or many of the things that perhaps happen because we're on a stage entertaining a very large audience doesn't happen in the women's game. And we're working very hard to take what is good about the men's game, but also to make sure that those things we don't want to copy, we're not copying. So we have a little document at the moment called Treasuring Our Treasures, and it's looking at the women's culture and kind of unwrapping it, you know, why it's evolved, looking at our history, who were the driving forces, what was their ambition, what were they trying to do for women in society as a whole, as well as for themselves and for the game, and how do we want that to mirror the way we work with football in the future. So yes, we're taking, of course, we're learning from everybody. I mean, the American football system is another, for us, women's American football is huge. They are, without question, the world number one. So you're crazy not to look at great systems and understand them. But what you can never do is lift them up and plonk them in your own country. You've got to look at what makes them successful and how do you apply that. And I think that's, and the other thing about UK sport was there were some big shifts we needed to create, which had needed political support in order to get us to a place where we could compete effectively. So one simple example was when I arrived at UK Sport, we were only responsible for the last 4 years of funding for elite athletes. And Peter Keane, who was the architect really of all our success in London 2012, said to me, Sue, you need 8 years. But the other 4 years were managed by Sport England, Sport Scotland, Sports Council for Wales, Sport Northern Ireland. So I had to go and do quite a lot of politics to say, we want to manage all 8 of these. And we're going to get more investment, which will allow you to invest in the talent system below that. And that might sound easy, but it took me, gosh, I don't know, 18 months, I think, at least. So there were some big decisions we made, which were not copied from anybody, but were part of a real analysis of what it took to be the best. And how did we make that possible for people?
So I'm hearing in both of those examples a long-term evolution, that the moment the women's game isn't at a stage and an age or of development that is appropriate to put the same things in place that the men have got from that entertainment and that scale and infrastructure, in the same way that for the Olympic team, the Paralympic team, to be the most successful, or to get the most out of the system that we have, it needed a longer term plan for the athletes, for the sports, for the performance directors, for the sports scientists like me to be able to work to. Yeah,
I think the difference between 2000 and 2004, when we were 10th in the medal table, and then Beijing, where we were 4th, London 3rd, Rio 2nd, was that we had understood what it took to be the best. And that knowledge was in the whole system. So instead of relying on a few sports to bring us a few medals, we suddenly had it system-wide. And we did that through the performance directors to a large extent, but also by the way we funded. We changed the funding mechanism. We changed the mindset about what we were going to fund. Some people didn't like it. You know, it was payment by results. and it professionalized very rapidly the performance system. And, you know, the fact that in Tokyo we've still performed well tells me that the system as a whole has not dropped off. It gets what needs to happen in order to achieve success.
Mm. And how do you even, and this is almost an impossible question, but how do you even go about influencing across, down, up, down? Everyone, all stakeholders have got a view. Well, you own that bit, the 4 years, for example, or whether it's creating the case for increased infrastructure for women's football, girls' football at schools. Influencing up, influencing the team, and influencing people who are looking on and commentating. How do you even go about that?
Well, I'm a great believer in one mission, one team. So if you work to that philosophy, in other words, if you are very clear what the objective is, the next thing is how do you get everybody to see the same thing? You know, how do you get everybody to see the mountaintop? So UK sport, 10th in the medal table, and I asked Pete what he thought was possible, and he said, I think by London we could be 4th in the medal table, and this is how we'd do it. Again, the architect of what we needed to do. My job was to persuade people to come on that journey with us, and there was a lot of cynicism. Oh, you've got to be joking now. You know, you're not going to. You know, even our colleagues in UK sports said, "Oh no, that's a bit unrealistic." No, it's not. That's where we're going. And so I think it's about being able to articulate the vision in a way which is ambitious but very real, so that people can go, oh, okay, maybe I can join that vision, because you can show them the steps you're going to need to take to do that. And I think if you're talking to people who are very cynical or non-believers, I think you have to move into a different kind of style. So, you know, on the one hand, you're selling a vision, but when you're meeting cynics or people who don't buy it, you've got to start being a buyer, not a seller. In other words, you've got to understand what it is. You've got to talk to them enough to understand what it is that's not helping them see the vision. So you start, instead of selling, which, you know, they just put the wall up and go, no, don't get it. You start to say, well, okay, explain that to me. Why do you think that's not possible? And what's your approach to that? And what would you do? And by the time you've finished, if you're skillful enough, it's facilitation, really. You facilitate them to where you want to go. So I think it's different strokes for different folks, but it's about the ability to get everybody lined up on one clear, this is what we're going to do. And even, you know, not always knowing quite how at the beginning, but getting the, okay, let's go for this. And then being very open, really, with people and transparent, you know, on the journey. I don't know if you remember the boards we had up at UK Sport at each end of the room. We had Olympics at one end and Paralympics at the other, and we literally got the media in every 3 months and showed them, you know, these are red, these are green, these are amber. The sports weren't that comfortable with that either, but it was a way of saying there's going to be no surprises here. You know, if they're green, they're telling us they're on their medal target. If they're amber, there's something wrong with the system. If they're red, they're in trouble. Our job at UK Sport was to spend our time on red and amber, not on green. Whereas in the previous environment, we'd always spent our time on green. Oh, these are going to be the successful ones. We give a lot more money and we give a lot more sport. And I was in that. Now, you know, we might differentiate financially, but we've got to put real energy into the red and the amber. And so by the time we kind of got to London, you know, that board was pretty green. They were pretty well on. The only sport that still was on amber, ironically, was swimming, and that's exactly how they performed, amber. So, you know, and there were a whole host of reasons for that. And I think that openness and that transparency and that not hiding things, not being afraid put your head above the parapet and say, this isn't good enough. Not to pull anyone down ever, but to create the ambition. We've got to go again. We came out of London, and within 3 months, we were talking about how we could do better. We'd done a real analysis. Where hadn't it worked? Where had it worked? What could we do? Where were the challenges? Were we investing enough in para? Was para slowly slipping? Because if you remember, in London, it slipped down a couple of notches. So there were a whole set of issues and that's for me is what makes world class. World class is not just being good. It's always believing you're not good enough. It's searching for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It's a restlessness that never leaves you. You just want to know what next, what next, what next. If you ever get to the point where you're not restless, you're probably going backwards. And that's the truth of performance sport, really.
Yeah, and just to unpack a bit of that, I think that there's that sense of, here's the vision, here's that Everest, here's the summit, that articulation of the future, which you do so well as a leader, but also that quite grounded leadership behavior that I'm hearing around listening and questions as a way of engaging. And I remember a similar sort of approach after 2012, of that lull and this idea of winning more medals. And we were all thinking, we don't even know where it is. Okay, it's in Brazil. That might be fun. But that idea of looking around and everybody's thinking, we can't do more with the same.
Yeah.
And rather than my approach of just thinking, let's push, let's go, let's intensify things, was actually to listen. And that sense of engagement of, well, I'm being heard for the first time, which feels novel. My ideas are being valued, but actually it unearthed so many real deep insights from people on the ground who are working with that performer. I think if we did this, we would get that, and it unlocked a whole series of insights and intelligence that we were able to roll out for 2016. I'm hearing a similar approach of engaging the workforce, making them feel connected with that vision, but a simple action of listening.
Yeah, look, I remember when I first went to the FA, and Martin had brought me in, obviously, to do this strategy for the women's game. And every time he passed me in a corridor, he says, "That strategy done yet?" And I'd say, "No, not yet. No, not yet. No, not yet." And he goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm listening, Martin." And he goes, "Just get on." And "No, I'm listening, Martin." Okay. And for 6 months, all I did was, to be honest, was let people tell me what was going on, what the barriers were, what the challenges were. And slowly, and to begin with, that just felt like a massive, almost confusing array of stuff. But as the time passed, it started to crystallize in my head as to where we needed to go. And by the time I got to sort of 6 months, 7 months, I'd got the mist and started to slightly lift off the mountain. I couldn't quite see the mountain, but I'd certainly come off the beach. And I was kind of standing on the cliff top, looking up at the mountain. And as I started to unwrap that and started to try those ideas out on people, what if we did this? What would you think about that? People, "Oh, no, that won't work." And you think, "Well, why do you think that'll work?" I started to unwrap it for another few months. And then I sat down one day and said, "Right, I'm ready." I wrote a plan. And I pushed it out to my colleagues and say, "Right, have a look. Are you happy? Can you join in with this now?" And everybody went, "Oh, yeah, that was my idea. Oh, yeah, that was my idea." Because what you're doing is you're not just reflecting your own thoughts, you're reflecting conversations. And the moment people think they are in the plan, they own the plan. It doesn't matter if they only got 3 words in. They feel the plan is their plan. And so the minute the plan is truly a joint venture, which it has to be, and a truly expression of everything you've heard, all the listening you've done, then people go, "Oh, I'm behind this. I can do this." And then the next trick is to get the resources to do the job, right? And that's never easy for any of us. So, but slowly, bit by bit, I was able to kind of turn what was essentially a vision into a business plan to get the resources we needed. And I'd say, you know, the women's game absolutely could always do with more money, but we're in a very much different place than we were when I came in terms of resources and the level of investment and the kind of commercial partners we now have, which we just didn't have when I first came.
You've alluded to a couple of big challenges, such as acquiring resources or getting the economics in place or convincing the politicians, for example. What have been the biggest leadership challenges you've faced?
In this particular job or generally?
Just overall, in your experiences.
Well, I think my first leadership role was at the National Coaching Foundation. Prior to that, I had done a series of things which were shaping my philosophy, my values, and what I believed it was all about. So teaching, lecturing, 4 years in the inner city, working with people who were disadvantaged, using sport as a vehicle to change lives. And suddenly I found myself at the National Coaching Foundation as the new, as a chief executive. It was a grand title because it was, as I say, Jean Vorderman was the only other person. Carol Vorderman.
We'll start somewhere. Was it really?
Carol Vorderman's mum was my secretary.
Someone to do the numbers.
She was. Hey, listen, she was a lot more than that. She was a very, very resourceful, special woman. She was very good. So we worked as a two really to get the thing going, and I learned some really good skills there about how to go and get resources in to do things and how to schedule. But I was still learning in leadership. I was definitely learning my leadership. And I got some of that really wrong. And I didn't always cover myself in glory. So when I started the Youth Sport Trust, I was able, as you all are when you go to a new job, you can kind of redefine yourself. So I kind of redefined me. And again, started with just myself and one other person in one office, in one room, and slowly started to build something. Those two were building from the grassroots up. And you don't realise when you're doing that, you're growing your culture. You don't realise you in a sense, how you are is the culture, because that's kind of partly what's happening as you grow a business. And then, so the first real time I walked into something that I hadn't given birth to, if you like, was UK sport. And I found that hard. I kind of went around and I looked and I talked to everybody. I tried to speak to everybody in the building and just spend time. Who are you? What do you do? How do you do it? What are the challenges? The same sort of things that I'd done before. But one of the biggest challenges was how did you take an organisation that in their own minds was now successful? They'd been 36th in Atlanta. We were 10th in Sydney. And that's when I arrived in 2003. It looked like we were going to be 10th again in Athens. And I asked them, were we good? And they said, yeah, because we were 36th in Atlanta. And I thought, well, I've never wanted to be 10th in my life. How do you get them from that place to where I want them to be, which is far more ambitious? And that was about changing a mood and a culture and unlocking creativity. And there were some great people in there, but it needed a different environment. It needed a recognition that we couldn't talk world class. We had to be it. We had to think, what was it going to take for us to drive this vision? And that this vision couldn't be ours. It had to be a shared vision. And while we had the money, which always makes people think they have the power, you don't really have the power. You have the investment to drive a shared vision. And I think that cultural shift was probably, and some of the politics, oh my gosh, the politics were, 4 home countries, challenges around, early days where, was UK sport the slave or was it the leader? Who ran who? How did it work? What was going on? And again, it was about creating collaboration, understanding that we're all together in this and that it wasn't about me telling them or them telling me. It was about us working together to find solutions. So I think politics definitely was huge and culture was huge at UK sport. And then system development, while Pete very much was the architect, it took the politics that I had to do to give him the resources and the shape he wanted, so it was, and we had Liz in there as well in the mix, Liz Nichol, who just was so respected by the governing bodies. She already brought them almost to the table because they respected Liz so much. So the three of us really made, I think, a shift in culture and behaviours. At the FA, I think it's been culture as well, definitely, but it's been winning hearts and minds, really. The men's game is so big, so strong, so powerful. It's massively resourced. It's incredibly successful. It's a massive business. And here are we, this sort of, as they, the way I described it when I first spoke to the board was, look, men's football's like an oak tree. You stood there, you've got all these branches, you're very formidable, you're very visible, and everybody can see who you are. And the women's game's like a sapling, and it's sitting underneath the oak tree, and it hasn't decided yet whether it wants to be an oak tree or a different kind of tree. Mm-hmm. And my job's to dig it up, put it under in its own light, and let it grow. And you can see these people look at me and think, this woman's off her rocker. But that was my analogy, and that's what I've tried to do, which is not try and imitate the oak tree, is to learn from the oak tree and to register and recognise its strength. But it's to try and get people to understand we have to grow the women's game in its own light, in its own style, in its own way. And that's really hearts and minds stuff, and I still have people who jokingly will, pick issue with anything I say at the board meeting. I mean, and now it's done in a fun way. I mean, initially it wasn't funny, but now it's, you wouldn't expect me not to ask you this question, would you? So I go, no, I wouldn't. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. But you have to, those are things that, the way I described it to people who knew me was, if you go to a party and you're a bit late and you go in and it's not your kind of party, and you kind of think, oh, this isn't for me. You've got two choices, really. One is you say, thanks a lot, I'm off. And the other is you go and sit in the corner, you get yourself a nice glass of wine, you sit in the corner and you wait and see if anybody comes over to talk to you, and slowly you gather a gang and then you start to enjoy the party. The rest is going on over here somewhere, right? And I say that's a bit like the women's game, right? I've slowly, like a magnet, people have come into the corner with me, and people now are really excited about the women's game. They're starting to see it as a jewel in the crown. They're starting to see it as something that can affect massive societal change. And you find like-minded people who want to sit in your corner. And then slowly you discover that actually the rest of the party is starting to look at you because you're starting to change things.
You're starting to dance a bit.
Yeah. But what you can't do is go in and say, I don't think this party's right. I think you all need to, that's never going to work in a million years. So it's kind of the subtlety, really, of change. So I guess my hearts and minds would be the biggest one there. And that takes time, it takes patience, and it takes incredible resilience, because there are times when you think, I'm not making any headway here at all. But it's partly what you learn, isn't it, as a professional as you go through life, that you don't always get what you want straight away.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and that really links to the idea of NCF, Youth Sport Trust, where it was your party. You set the tone. You chose the music, and correct. When you go into a different party, you're now starting to have to work out how does this party go, and start to meet a few people. I'm conscious of your time, Sue. If I could do a couple of wrap-up questions, just to
sure.
Bit unfair potentially, but what would be one of your proudest moments if you had to go back in time? If you to replay a day, and I've also got a future-focused one as well, if I could.
Proudest, I think. The thing that touches me, moves me, is when I see young people achieving their ambitions, and that I know somewhere I've played a small part in helping that happen, because that's why I do it, right? And that was set very much at that first job, teaching in Moss Side, thinking my job was to teach netball and discovering my job was to teach young people. And learning that it was no good giving them netball if netball was an absolute no-no to them. It was about working with them and understanding that if you met them halfway, that you could really affect their self-esteem, their self-worth. And so that's kind of stayed burning in me throughout, whether that's working with elite people or whatever, or young people. But those two worlds of young people is a heart thing. Elite sport is a head thing for me. It's fascinating to me. I find the whole thing of trying to create an environment where people come to be their absolute best really intriguing. But my heart thing is I just want to see kids happier, healthier, fitter, emotionally well. So I guess the moment when those two worlds came together was that sort of opening ceremony at the Olympics in 2012, where we had the young people take the flames off, the well-known athletes, but these were young people and they were sports leaders and they were aspiring youngsters, and they ran around and then they lit the flame. And I think that moment where my two worlds, if you like, suddenly were visibly in touch with one another, the inspiration of the Olympics and the youth of tomorrow being part of that inspirational moment, I guess that was pretty special for me. Alongside the Queen jumping out the helicopter, of course, but that was a pretty special moment for me, because it was like watching my two worlds happen together. And most of my life, I've either been in one world or the other. And at football, the joy for me is I'm in both worlds again, because I'm responsible all the way through. So, I'll see great videos of the work we're doing with inner city kids in football, and then I'll be with the England women, at the moment winning their various games. So I think there is a joy for me in that virtuous circle of inspiration, driving participation, providing opportunity, growing, succeeding. That virtuous circle is what excites me, and that's definitely my key moment was that London 2012 one.
But it comes full circle in the sense that those two worlds, everybody in the world could connect with that, of the proven performers, the role models, and tomorrow. But as you say, the Queen jumping out of the helicopter, which was quintessentially a British sort of quirk, along with Side Mr. Bean and so on. But as you spoke to, that's a system over there in Canada or Australia. We've got to make it our own. We've got to make it something that speaks to our identity. And then, so last question then, Sue. 50 years ahead, what would you expect to see? Not necessarily what you hope, because hope could potentially be maybe, but what would you expect to see in sport?
Well, it's hard to separate the hope bit from the expect bit. I expect, I hope, that at somewhere
very good.
In the future, a government will recognise the power of sport to change lives. They will recognise this isn't just about physicality. It's about emotional wellness. It's about social interaction. It's about psychological balance. It's all the things that we talk about and that society struggles with. And it's a counter to many of the things that are actually affecting our kids' lives. It is so important. And I would expect that eventually a government would understand that and make sure that our physical education and school sports system is the best in the world, which it is not at the moment and is deteriorating. So my expectation is that at some point, somebody has got to recognise this and do something about it. In terms of individual sports, I think, I expect that the modernisation of sport, which includes the diversification and inclusion of people from all parts of our community at every level of the game, whether that's playing, coaching, refereeing, I expect that to no longer be something we have to talk about day in and day out. And that hopefully sport is there representing the very best of behaviours, of social interaction. But I expect that sport will always be a reflection of wider society, and we cannot expect it to be better than society we live in. What we can expect is for it to truly influence the world we live in and make a real difference to the lives of every single person that lives in this amazing country of ours.
Amazing. Well said. And I expect if you continue to be that voice, then we're going to be on a trajectory to that. Sue, you never fail to uplift. Conversation with you is just a shot in the arm. So I remember about 2013, 2014, you were kind enough to come along to one of our aspiring professional workshop, and you spoke about your experiences. You created that case, you created that perspective and that inspiration for those young minds. But I remember more than anything, actually, one of our new leaders, a lady called Emma Ross, who at the time had just started on our system, and she came up to me afterwards and said, thank you. She said, thank you for introducing me to someone I can look up to, a true role model. And you've been that for so many people. So thank you so much, Sue.
That's my pleasure. And thank you for the opportunity to talk to you.